All right, so on to sex.
A perfect segue. Actually, it could be.
So
We're not going there.
I loved watching Christiane in the realm of the battle of the sexes rather than the battle of the soldiers, because she was so shy. When she's at war, she charges around freely, but when she's interviewing a Berlin bondage expert who's trying to tie her up and ask her about her sex life, she's a bit demure, which is a whole new look for her. And also the series comes at a revolutionary time in America with the Me Too reckoning. Men and women in America and other parts of the world are recalibrating all their sexual interactions. I found the series fascinating and sometimes a little discouraging, because it's amazing that something that is such an essential part of our lives is still so hard for many people around the world, and still so many inequities for women seeking pleasure and happiness. So, Christiane, you said you got this idea in the bathroom?
I did. I mean, as odd as it sounds, I was actually brushing my teeth, getting ready to go to work at the sink, looking in the mirror, listening to the radio. And this was about 3 years ago. And they were telling the stories of the first really major influx or outflow of Syrian refugees trying to escape the terrible war there. And where were they going to go? And they were coming to Jordan, and they were being housed in these tent camps and, containers and things. And I suddenly thought, but gosh, once they've survived and they've got across the border and they're in these massive camps, how do they have a personal life? How do they have a private life? How do they have sex? How do they have children? With everybody listening to their business and in their business and, cheek by jowl in these tents and containers, and not to mention that your energy must be spent on trying to survive, trying to find food and water, trying to make sure your kids are safe and educated. What about the other side of life? What about the personal happiness side of life? What about the fulfillment side of life? What about keeping your relationships together and keeping your kids and talking to your kids about these important, personal things? And so that led me to think about not just refugees in refugee camps, but people all over the world, but mostly women and young girls, because I'm a woman and I wanted to do it through the perspective of women. And I found, and it's interesting to hear you were discouraged in some parts. I was actually really energized, because I found that in many of the places I went, including the Middle East, I was in Beirut, I was in the Far East, Tokyo and Shanghai, in Africa, Accra, Ghana, and New Delhi, Berlin. And I found that in many of these places, I had always covered women, girls, men, ordinary civilians, in the worst, most extreme situations, as they were, in war, disaster, famine, and crisis situations. And to be able to actually explore something so much more intimate, something so warm, something so human, something so fundamental to our experience as people, was a great liberation for me, a great sort of change for me. And I was especially gratified that I wasn't looking at these people as victims. I wasn't looking at these women as victims. I didn't choose to focus on pornography or on human trafficking or on forced marriages and things. I wanted to look at the flip side, because everybody does the victim thing. And I actually found that so many of these young, particularly the youngsters, the younger generation, are taking their own destinies in their hands as much as they can, and much more than they used to. So in previous generations would be about forced marriages, would be about the family ruling the roost, and everything from honor killings to marriages to where you go to school, what you do with your life, the work you do, especially for a woman, was within the paradigm of what was best for the family. Everybody in the family had a vote on what you as a woman could do, except for you. And I found that this is changing. And let's just recently, without me even knowing what was happening in India, a UN report, I think it's the UN, came out to say that over the last year or so, massive decrease in the number of forced marriages and child marriages in South Asia, powered by a whole education system in India, for instance. Now, I find that really encouraging. And then, you know, there were many, many other fun and, you know, human stories that I discovered. But on the macro, I actually found that, you know, as much as there is catastrophe and crisis all over the world, and as much as women have not yet solidified their rights, either here or there are real green shoots of hope, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, you were interviewing, I think it was an Afghan refugee, right, in a conference room, and she's trying to figure out how she can possibly have sex in this public, you know, situation. And the woman goes, I got pregnant right in this room.
Yeah.
Right in the room where they were doing the interview.
Yeah, which was actually a school.
Yeah,
it looked like a
it's
conference
school.
room,
Yeah.
separated by just pieces of material, but
Right.
that was, you know, fabric. Into the bedroom and the kids area and the living room, and there was the couple, their 2 children. The young wife of 22 was pregnant with her 3rd kid, and she had got pregnant there. This was a refugee camp that the Germans had set up, you know, sort of place for these refugees. You know, Germany did the right thing. Germany took in about 1 million refugees who were fleeing Syria, and they've been incredibly well integrated, and it's actually working.
Well, that's a fascinating part where there's a German woman who teaches sex classes to young Muslim male refugees to try and take them out of the strange place they'd been, and they haven't heard of orgasms or anything, and she wants to normalize them into
Exactly,
society.
and that was one of the things that the German and other governments said. The men who come from those parts of the world, who have no experience with women's rights, had to take these classes to be able to, you know, conform with society.
Yeah, that was
And actually they were fascinating.
Yeah.
Those classes were really somewhat humorous, actually.
So what was your biggest surprise?
Well, I love those classes.
Right.
Apart from me playing naked ping pong, and you're going to have to see whether I'm actually naked. I'm not going to give anything away. But the guys were naked.
She strips a little, but we won't say how much.
Going to a BDSM class in Berlin, which ended up looking to me more like an afternoon extreme yoga class, and then having
It's like flying. Yoga.
Yeah, and then having ropes thrown around me. I'm not used to that kind of thing, but especially not on television. So I did my normal thing, and I just like totally pretended that this wasn't happening, and I kept interviewing with a straight face. But I guess what surprised me and at the same time gratified me is that all over the world, it's the same situation. No matter where you are, that the dynamic between women and men, between the family and the youngsters, between, you know, this whole sort of moment that we're experiencing now, the Me Too movement, is so fundamentally important here. You can imagine how important it is in the rest of the world.
Well, I guess the thing I found a little discouraging, and maybe because it's true in Ireland too, is she goes to Tokyo and Shanghai and talks to so many people about how they never hug or kiss or have public displays of affection, fathers and mothers and children and boyfriends and girlfriends and husbands and wives, and that was a little sad.
That was sad, most particularly in Tokyo where it's extreme. I mean, there's a whole class of sexless marriages. That's what they call them, sexless marriages. There's a whole growing group of asexual young men. I mean, men who are virgins up to a certain, you know, over the age of 20. There's a big dysfunction in sexual relations, certainly in Tokyo. I don't know about the whole of Japan, but certainly in Tokyo. And there was one of the couples who we focused on at the very end was the antidote to all of this. It was, you know, a wife, her husband. This was his second marriage, and he admitted that he had basically messed up his first marriage by being the typical, what they call office man, the office worker, the person who had got up at 6 o'clock in the morning, went to work, didn't come back till 11 or 12, usually drunk, usually having been out with his male colleagues or potentially finding, you know, sex and intimacy elsewhere, and coming back home and never really having a relationship with the wife. And this couple, who we met and featured at the very end, were trying to do exactly the opposite and trying to promote an adoring relationship to others, and they were online, and they have the Adoring Husband Association, and part of it is for the husband to get up there publicly, a group of husbands, and shout at the top of their lungs, you know, I love you, and it's so amazing. And there's something probably about the serotonin and the exercise, and you know when you do anything vaguely athletic, you feel good, there's a rush. And, you know, all of a sudden everybody's smiling and they're hugging and they're kissing. But it was incredible to know that there is no PDA. It just doesn't exist it's just wrong to hold hands or kiss in public. But the youngsters are beginning to do it. So a certain generation have never had it, never done it, never will, although these people are trying. But the youngsters are trying, and they are trying to break out of this. And then there was this other episode where I went to a bar in Tokyo, and I wanted to talk to sort of Sex in the City. Do you know what I mean? Young women who were professionals, who were of a certain socioeconomic, they had money to spend, and it was wild talking to them about sex. This woman admitted to me that she hadn't slept in the same room as her husband for 10 years. And what they do is, after they've had their kids, the husband stays in the marital chamber and becomes again, office man, and goes off and does his thing. And the wife, goes into the children's wing and sleeps with the children, basically. And this woman had practically tears in her eyes when I was asking her about her relationship. And she admitted that she now has a boyfriend, but it's all very quiet and subdued. And now there are burgeoning hostess clubs. In other words, men have always been able to go to host clubs, and often they don't have sex, they just want to go and talk. So strained are interpersonal relationships that they don't even find the intimacy of conversation, so they actually go and pay for that. And now there is the same for women in Tokyo, and it's really interesting.
And it costs $100,000 a month?
Sometimes.
To go and complain about not having sex with your husband?
Yeah, and to talk to young boys who will actually listen to you. But it's not a month, it's however much you choose to plonk down on drink and paying
That's
this boy.
How much it would be. So this was the funny part. So Christiane is asking this young host what exactly he does for the women, and he goes, well, sometimes I give them a princess lift.
Yes, yes. Imagine
like
that.
In Dirty
Just
Dancing.
Lift them.
Yeah. You know what was
It's weird.
Yeah, I have 50 pages of questions about Japan, because Japan has, to me, the most unusual sexual mores. But another really interesting thing was the young heterosexual Japanese women like to watch male gay porn on their phones. What do they call it? The Rotten Girl Club?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And manga. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in Japan and China, you looked at some of the, again, Christiane is so embarrassed, many of these segments, but you were looking at the early ancient erotica.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
They started out much more.
Well, that is actually fascinating, Maureen, and you'll know from your visits to the Middle East and elsewhere, and we all know that we live now in a very prudish society where sex is taboo. Even here, there isn't any real interpersonal sex education for our kids. It's all very, it's all very much about anatomical detail and when you should do it and what protection you should take and what precaution. But do we really have classes on love, courtship, intimacy, emotion, feelings? Do our kids really know where to get this kind of information other than now? Obviously, porn is rampant, and that's a problem in terms of if that's your paradigm, or from friends. I mean, since time immemorial, people have got it from somewhere. But there's no attempt to break down these taboos, and we're in 2018 in the United States of America, in Britain, in Europe, and of course, way down the line in places far and further east, where they're less advanced in these cases. So it was actually amazing to see these young people try to figure out how to learn about relationships, how to learn how, dating, for instance. There is no such concept of dating in China. Why? Because for millennia there have been arranged marriages. So now there are dating coaches in China. And China, Shanghai particularly, has the highest concentration of female billionaires and millionaires in the world. Because for many reasons, including the one-child policy, those who chose to keep their girls and not abort them poured all their love and energy and money into making sure their girls had the best of everything. And now there are lots of very, very successful and powerful girls looking for men who do outnumber them, but the kind of men who, you know, are up to this new modern generation of women. And so, you know, there's so many interesting social dynamics in a country like China, which underwent one of the worst types of social engineering.
Well, I wanted to tell Christiane that, you know, a lot of the China segment is about arranged marriages, and there are
breaking out of it.
Really funny segments where there's a TV dating show where the parents, you know, decide who their kids can date, and then the parents set up umbrellas with flyers attached in the park advertising their kids.
Yep, it's amazing. And guess who's the host of this dating show on television, one of the most popular shows in Shanghai, a transgender woman.
Yeah.
So they've got everything.
Right. But I went to tell Christiane that one time, a long time ago, like 15 or 20 years ago, I was interviewing Jessica Lange. And I said to her, oh my God, you've had two of the most amazingly passionate love affairs with these two amazing men, Mikhail Baryshnikov and Sam Shepard, and what is that like? And she paused and looked away and she goes, it taught me to believe in arranged marriages. So, China may not be as weird as we seem. All right, so I'm going to go through all the countries, and just to make sure I have time, I'm going to put away all my Japanese questions. But before we leave Japan, you know, a lot of the men have a hard time communicating, and so obviously they've moved on to sex dolls, and they feature one of these crazy sex dolls.
And robots and things.
Yeah.
But one of the things you asked me, and I sort of lost my train of thought, was about the books of erotica.
Oh, right.
And I think that is one of the things that's so interesting. I started to say that we're in this very, very weird moment of politics and religion and sexuality and all of that sort of combining, basically since about 1979, if you take our modern era, whether it's in the West, whether it's in, you know, the Islamic world, or even the Jewish world, even in Israel, with this sort of rise of conservatism in all of our countries and orthodoxy. But if you go back hundreds of years, you know, you have the Kama Sutra. You go back further, you have the shunga in Japan, which is what you're mentioning. Yeah. So all these graphic images of sex, which were how-to manuals, and which were all, and including in the Arab world, there's this book called The Perfumed Garden. That really staggered me. I couldn't believe it. I mean, here we have this unbelievable set of religious reasons why women are second-class, third-class, and fourth-class citizens in the Arab world. And sex is such, and in the Muslim world, the sex is such a taboo that you go back hundreds of years and you see, actually, it wasn't always like that. And these are not just books for men. These are books for women as well, who instruct women how to seek their pleasure and get their pleasure from their men. And to think that we've come so, you know, full circle over so many hundreds of years that it's now a taboo topic is kind of sad.
So religion, is that the problem?
That's one of the problems.
Yeah.
Of course it is.
Right.
Of course it is. And I mean, in Japan, I asked them, you know, what happened? And they said, well, you know, we had Shunga, we had this amazing book, our version of the Kama Sutra. And then in the 1800s, the Victorians came. And we decided that, you know, we needed to be more Western, we need to be sophisticated, we need to move, you know, to Western ideas. And with it came this closure and this very uptight morality that the Victorian era brought. But I don't know whether any of you have been watching Victoria on television. This woman had a great sex life with Albert. I mean, that was a really great love story.
And with the guy after that.
Yeah, several.
So in India, so there's no cuddling in public, no sex before marriage. Unmarried couples are refused rooms in hotels. Mm-hmm. One young woman described their romantic trajectory as don't talk to boys, don't talk to boys, don't talk to boys, now make love and get married.
And you cleaned it up.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, Indian schools, I guess, are trying to figure out how to talk about Indian masculinity. And in fact, we're going through the same thing. That was the cover of the Times Magazine, how you teach boys, you know.
Well, I've always said that, you know, this is the situation that we're in as women, whether it's here, whether it's there, nothing will get resolved unless we include our boys and our men. Nothing. This is not just about educating girls on their rights. It's educating boys as well. And I'm mother of a boy, 18. He's going to be 18 in 2 weeks' time. And, you know, as I said, boys are raised to be macho, not to shed a tear, not to have an emotion, not to fail, not to get dumped, not to, you know, all of this stuff is like an affront to masculinity. And there are so many very interesting men now writing interesting books. And they're usually the artists and the comedians, actually. There's this wonderful, I don't know whether you know, the British artist Grayson Perry, who wrote a book about masculinity and sort of had his manifesto for men. And I do believe that, this is the moment where we have to get serious about engaging, involving our men as well as our women and our girls, boys and girls. And I do think that the generation, my son's generation, is so much more open and tolerant and sweet and sensitive than and able to actually show their feelings than perhaps
That's
my
true,
generation.
but they've also been very shaped by porn.
Yes.
You deal with in some
Yes,
countries.
yes.
Yeah. So in the India part, you talk about the problem there with harassment and rape.
Yeah. Well, India is one of the most dangerous places, has historically been one of the most dangerous places to be a woman.
Right.
A few years ago, there was this catastrophe of this gang rape. I mean, it's one of many, but it took the world's attention because it was this young medical student. She was traveling with a friend and they were gang raped on a bus. She was gang raped on a bus and later died. And India rose up and the rest of the world actually paid a lot of attention. And I think a lot of corrective measures went into effect after that. And India was horrified and ashamed and humiliated that this was happening. But of course, remember, you know, there's bride burning, there's, you know, it used to be that widows would have to go and basically self-immolate on the pyres of their husbands when their husbands died. You know, if I remember covering for 60 Minutes years ago, a story of a young woman who didn't want to get married to the person that she had been told to get married to, partly because it would have completely, well, it would have gone against her wishes, but it would have devastated her own family because they had to give so much in dowry. So there are these dowry crimes that go on. And, you know, this still happens, but there's this huge effort to educate and to change this situation, whether it's on the police level, on the prosecutor level, or educating in terms of girls' rights and trying to end the incidence of child marriage, which they define as under 18s being forced to get married.
So you warred around with an all-female biker gang in India. That looked like fun, except for the cows on the road.
Yeah, a lot of cows, and they're sacred, so you can't actually beep or bang into them or anything.
And is that biker gang about, you know, kind of exploring their
independence,
empowerment? Yeah.
actually. And actually it started, guess why? Because these women, each and every one of them who's in this biker gang, it was started by the group of women who found that they were unacceptably physically harassed on the public transport. You know, people would rub up against them, all that kind of stuff. And we know that, I know that happens in the French metro, you know.
Right.
So, you know, enough already. And that's why this moment is so important. It's so important, the Me Too movement, and it mustn't be squandered on the scalps of just a few high-profile people. This is a real moment when we say enough is enough, when men and women say enough is enough, either in that kind of extreme sexual abuse and harassment or in the casual, everyday sexism and misogyny that is still alive and well in this country and in many of the other non-democratic, non-democratic countries.
All right, that brings us to Beirut. Now, is Beirut the place that had the hymen replacement
Correct.
surgery?
It's called hymenoplasty to
Because
the cognoscenti.
I remember many years ago, 30 years ago, my mother, you know, when I was still living at home, my mother called up the stairs and said, "Oh my gosh, they've discovered how to do hymen replacement surgery. There are going to be such long lines."
And there are.
And there are in Beirut. So,
But isn't that sad as well?
yeah.
The biggest reason for it is because virginity in many cultures, and most especially in the Islamic culture, is prized above all else. So that men, and this is again where it's, and I found this in Accra, Ghana too, which is one of the most burgeoning and successful cities in Africa, where there's a lot of, you know, young entrepreneurs, men, women, and having a great and successful time. And men are expected to go out and have multiple partners before they get married, as a experience, as a virility thing, as, you know, make sure they choose the right wife, etc. That's part of what they're expected to do, including in the Arab world. But God forbid women should do that.
Yeah, they were explaining in Ghana to Christiane that the men had mistresses and girlfriends and wives, and that the whole country revolved around the happiness of the men, and that you had to cook for your man and
but
do
actually,
all this stuff. And Christiane is like, that leaves me out.
Yeah, that leaves me out. It's interesting actually, because in Ghana, the women who I talked to said that a lot of it was about economic necessity. You know, they apparently, as a woman or an individual, you cannot rent an apartment without putting down several months' rent, which they don't have. It's as simple as that. So they are somebody's girlfriend or somebody's mistress, and then there's the wife. But of course, this is also a culture that has long indulged in, what's the right word? Multiple wives. What's it called? Polygamy. Thank you.
Yeah.
Woo! Yeah, so it's not that unusual in terms of the history. But, you know, it's interesting to see how they cope with that. But I must say, there's so many sassy, amazing women, certainly who I met in Accra and who I met all over the place, who are seizing this moment and actually, you know, transcending and getting over some of these incredible cultural restrictions that they've lived under for so long. But the hymenoplasty, there was this wonderful, beautiful doctor, OBGYN, and also she called herself a sex therapist, because she ended up giving lessons and therapy to many of these young women who came to her before they were about to get married. And many of them said, you know, I have got to be a virgin on my wedding night. So there's a flourishing trade in hymenoplasty. You see, I'm sort of miming. But she said also, you know, it has been drilled into them to the point of pathology that virginity is everything and that the hymen is everything. So those who haven't lost their virginity come to her and they want lessons and advice on what to do on their wedding night. And they are so freaked out by having been told their entire life, since they could listen and hear anything, that they had to be virgins, that they don't even want to lose it to their husbands on their wedding night. They are literally trying to figure out how to relax and how to do it. And the doctor says, you know, you may be losing something, but you're gaining something else. You're gaining a partner, you're gaining love, you're gaining a husband. And she said, and if you don't do it, it's not going to go down very well. So it's a whole sort of pathology that has erupted over this.
And then there was a group of very attractive young Beirut lesbians who were very taken with you and asked you if you had ever had an experience. Christiane has to spend a lot of time dodging very personal
deflecting
questions.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing I found interesting was that Beirut women are so obsessed with beauty and beauty products because one of them said they've been raised in a destroyed city.
Actually, you know, that is an interesting observation, and then I'll get back to the LGBT group that I was talking to, because it's very unusual in the Arab world and indeed in Africa, because in many parts of that world it is actually illegal. and they are actually, really harassed and hounded and imprisoned and all sorts of things. So it's a very, very difficult, lifestyle. What was it? Oh, the beauty. I remember when I was covering the war in Bosnia, in Sarajevo, which was, just absolutely awful. I mean, it was the first time we had genocide in Europe since the end of World War II. The city of Sarajevo, which after all had hosted the Winter Olympics in 1984, was a really worldly city, multi-ethnic, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, the whole lot. And people had lived side by side for centuries. And it was under siege, like this medieval siege, and there was very little electricity and food and all the rest of it. All this to say that when occasionally people could gin up a generator or whatever and get some electricity, or the besiegers had allowed, lines to be fixed for, I don't know, some special occasion, the first thing that happened, the women rushed to the beauty salons. The first thing, firstly to re-dye their roots, which were now down to here, to get a haircut, to get the mani-pedi, whatever it was. But the real reason, the subconscious psychological reason, was to stay dignified, to stay human, to keep that little bit of humanity that the world was taking away from them with this siege, with this shelling, with this sniping that went on for 4 or 5 years. And that is what beauty does for women, and care, and probably for men as well, but I was focusing on women, that in a state of war, you don't know whether you're going to survive from day to day. And even though it's not open warfare in Lebanon right now, it's, they're worried. They're never quite sure that they're going to get through the next month or years without war breaking out. So beauty has become their default option, and what makes them feel good about themselves. And it's interesting. And there's, again, a lot of plastic surgery, a lot of good blow dries.
And that brings us to Berlin, and where you got tied up in a bondage class, and the bondage teacher
loosely
told you that 70 to 80% of people are not happy with their sex life.
Yes.
Even in Berlin.
Yes, which that's another fairly constant, of this whole operation, this whole sort of series.
Yeah, that was depressing. And you said the Nazis burnt down the world's first sex research institute.
I did say that.
Because Hitler thought the only role for women was to have lots of blonde, blue-eyed babies.
Mm-hmm. There's a thing in Germany called KKK, and it's not what we think is KKK. It's church, kitchen, children. And that's what women are expected. Even a lot today. One of the very funniest chats I had around a kitchen table was in Berlin, and one woman was American, expat living there, and the others were German. And I was telling them that I'd just come from this bondage class, and I'd just seen this and that, and I was asking them about dating and date night and this and that. I said, date night? I'm so tired just trying to raise the kids, feed them, get my husband his dinner, this and that, that I can't even think about sex. And then we started talking about, domestic work and housework and sharing all that, and how that would increase potentially a woman's libido. And they said, absolutely. They said, it's not about us entering the male sphere anymore. It's about the men coming into our sphere and not helping us, but doing it with us. And you know what? If they did, we may feel like having sex more.
Yeah.
Certainly we'd have more time to think about it, and we'd have more inclination.
I was interested, you talked to this sexologist in Berlin about, she was talking about the new conservatism sweeping Germany and other parts of Europe, where women are being sent back to the kitchen. And I just wondered, as you've covered those parties and that trend, what do you think?
I think that in general, it's not really like that. I mean, there certainly is a trend amongst certain women, but in general, it's women and girls trying to figure out how to, as everyone, balance their lives. And once they figure out how to balance their work and private life, how to then really sort of enter the kind of intimate dialogue with their partner that allows them to express to their partner what makes them happy, what makes them stay together, what makes them, satisfied on every single level. I found in general communication to be a problem. And I don't know whether it's the same here, whether people talk to each other more in this kind of society and culture, but communication and real communication about what it is that makes you happy, about what it is that, you know, you can tolerate in each other, where, you know, what you want from each other on a daily basis, almost sort of rewriting the contract all the time, given the changing dynamics in your life, your history, wherever you are.
I love the story of the little girl who had been a slave who you met on 60
Oh,
Minutes.
that's
Tell
why I
that
went
story.
to Ghana. Oh my goodness. I wanted to do, when we chose to do a city in Africa, I immediately thought of Ghana, not really because of what Ghana is today, which is a very thriving city where women are really, really included in the workforce and even in the marketplaces. Even the traditional women are running these marketplaces. It's actually pretty women friendly. But 20 years ago, I'd done this report for 60 Minutes, which was investigating a phenomenon called trichosis. And it is very similar to many other, you know, such paradigms around the world, where young girls are essentially pawns made to, P-A-W-N-S, made to pay for the sins or the debts of their father or male relatives. So in this case, I had, you know, got into a dugout with my crew, and this is 20 years ago, and we'd rowed across the Volga River. Is it the Volga or the Volta? One of them. Went to this like island in the middle of the river where there was this shaman, these priests. They call them sanctuaries, I think, if I remember. And, you know, these guys, you know, pulling a fast one, essentially, telling all these men that they had to give them their prepubescent, their 5, 6, 7-year-old daughters, so that their sins would be absolved, so that whatever illness they had would be cured, whatever debt they had would be repaid, and et cetera, et cetera. And I met this young girl who now goes by the name of Brigitte, but then I don't think she even told me her name back then. And I've got all this sort of footage of when I asked her why she was there, was she happy, did she miss her parents? And I have never, ever, ever forgotten that story. And just before we started shooting this program, we heard back from her. She contacted our producer, Andrew Tkach, who was the producer on this segment, and she told him that our program on 60 Minutes had been seen by this wonderful person in America who had pulled out all the stops, who had got her out, and who adopted her and brought her back to the United States. I mean, really, it was fantastic.
And he
this
paid
part,
$10,000.
He
right?
paid $10,000 to the priest guy to, pay her debt, and pulled her out. And I said, we have to do this story because now she's actually going back to Ghana. She's in Accra. She's working to help, some of these people in the same situation. And when we met, I mean, it was really emotional.
Yeah, when they meet, she's just sobbing.
Yeah, and I had to ask her, I said, did you ever get violated? And she said, no. And she said, I think because you guys were there, they didn't dare touch me, but also I got out, but I got out before I had my period, before I was old enough.
Before.
Yeah, a month before. And therefore, I wasn't touched. As soon as girls started to become adolescents, then they were raped.
Yeah, that's
and they were sex slaves and labor slaves for the rest of their lives. So this was just such a fantastic ending to this tragic story.
I'm going to get to audience questions. I was going to ask you one more question about Accra. You talked to the Dr. Ruth of Accra, who has a call-in show advising
Mama
on
Zimbi.
sex. Mama Zimbi. And she advised one woman who felt she wasn't getting enough sex to make love to her husband while he's watching television. Which reminded me of the classic Seinfeld episode where George figures out how to make love and watch TV and eat a sandwich all at the same time, which he said was male nirvana. Okay, so here's the first question. It's a really great one. Talking about sex, can Stormy Daniels take Trump down?
Well, let's first see if 60 Minutes actually has the cojones to air the interview. We'll see. I don't know. Look, I don't know. You know, there's so many new normals that have been defined. In a different era, maybe, depending on what the actual facts are and what gets found out and all the rest of it. But it's certainly, you know, everybody's looking at it from abroad, where I usually report from. Everybody looks at everything that's happening in this White House. And I do think the serious aspect, though, is having done this series all over the world, and obviously reported on Me Too and all the rest of it. I mean, look, you know, when the leader of the free world has issues, just let's take the Access Hollywood tapes, it's a problem. Where's the example? You know, where's the morality? Where is it? And that's a problem. It's a problem.
All right, this is another good one. Melania, arrangement or true love?
I'm going to say green card. I don't know.
What's the one thing that shocked you the most while doing your series?
Shocked me. Just me talking about this stuff was shocking enough. That shocked me the most.
Did you find anything you want to try with Jamie? Your husband?
Not in public.
What role does the internet play, if any, in sex around the world? There was one country where I was, China was it, where you're not allowed to show nipples?
Yeah, I mean,
genitals on the internet?
Yeah, lots of yes. I mean, in quite a few of those places. But look, it has a huge role to play. In introducing people to the concept of the whole dating and the Tinder and all of this. But as we know, the porn aspect of it as well. Some of that is, I mean, you can think what you like about it. Some of it, though, some of the sexuality, which is not hardcore porn, but what they see on the internet, has actually shown people, men and women, what they can do, what's available for them in terms of, I don't just mean methods and positions and things like that, but feelings and rights and, you know, what relationships can be like, what intimacy can be like, all of that. So that's why a lot of people do look. And even if it's, you know, series and things that they see on the internet.
Okay, here's a good question. Putin versus Trump, who wins?
In what department? Nuclear missiles?
Yeah, who has the bigger
Love?
buttons?
Well, what do you think?
Putin versus Trump?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I think we have to figure out what is at the heart of that relationship, you know? I mean, it's the strangest thing I've ever covered in Washington.
It is so strange.
That's all I know.
And what do you think of, talking about Saudi Arabia, where we last met in the field,
I wanted to
what do you
ask
think
that.
of MBS and the driving ban being lifted?
Well, I wanted to ask you this because, you know, we covered Saudi Arabia in full Jim Crow flower, and women couldn't rent a car or get out of the country or go anywhere without a male guardian. And I tried to rent a car once and the guy just started hysterically laughing. But it has a new leader that is, you know, he said women can drive, and there seems to be hopeful signs as far as equity for women. But on the other hand, it's with this iron fist of authoritarianism. So I just wondered what you thought.
I think it's great that what the little steps that they're being given, and it's a massive freedom. I guess if you remember, the car brought such amazing freedom here to America, right? Every adolescent wants a car because it's about freedom. Right. So imagine these women who've never been allowed to drive. They can't go to their gym class. They can't go here, there, or anywhere without some guy having to pick them up, usually hired help, drivers and this and that. So they've never been able to be spontaneous. And now they'll be able to, and it's a real freedom that they're feeling. And there's a massive, you know, they're all getting driving lessons, of course, not on the roads right now, but in car parks and, you know, in the lots behind supermarkets and stuff like that. But the big issue, I think, is what you just mentioned, the male guardianship. Until they remove that, so that a woman can actually have a passport, can have her own money, can travel without the permission of a father or husband or son, if her husband is dead, the son or brother. I mean, imagine that. Talk about slavery. I mean, it's really terrible.
Yeah,
It's really tough. So
it's really
hopefully,
terrible.
gradually, that stuff will be lifted.
Will Trump serve a full term? If so, what are his chances of re-election?
Okay, I think he'll serve a full term. And then what happened tonight in Pennsylvania? Does anybody know? I don't know. You'll see. It'll unfold in the. I don't know. What can I tell you? Who knew that President Trump would be elected? So it's hard, actually. It's hard to make these kinds of decisions. We have to watch. We have to see. We have to see where the policy and the politics takes us. I think that most people think that the midterm elections will be an important barometer. And hasn't he already said something like, even though he's talked about 2020, he's also said that the next slogan will be "Keep America Great Again," or
yes,
"Great, Keep
right.
America Great."
Right.
So that could be I've done my job and now let somebody else keep America great. I don't know. I just don't know.
Yeah, I don't go along with these theories that he wants to get out of the White House.
No, I don't either.
Yeah, I think he's quite comfortable there. What can we expect of Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State?
Well, look, I think that's interesting, and circling back to how we started this conversation. You know, I sort of described Rex Tillerson as somebody who was much more on the negotiated way of doing foreign policy, whether it's Iran, whether it's trying to hold Russia accountable, whether it's diplomacy versus fisticuffs with North Korea. Mike Pompeo is described as a classic neocon. He's quite hawkish, and he also disdains the Iran deal, has been quite hawkish on North Korea in the past. I don't know what his tone will be now. You know, again, talking to Wendy Sherman, and these are the big issues that really matter. I mean, North Korea, if we're to believe that President Obama told President Trump when they met in the White House that his greatest challenge will be North Korea, you know, this is a huge issue, precisely because of the amount of technology that North Korea has perfected. And the US intelligence community were caught napping, unfortunately. They didn't realize how far advanced North Korea was in its nuclear warheads and its missile delivery systems. And so there are many people in the US intelligence community who do not believe that getting North Korea to denuclearize as a first step has any chance of flying. That the best you can hope for is maybe eventually down the line that might be a goal. But for the beginning, it's about freezing, it's about a détente, it's about sort of a Soviet-era Cold War, you know, ability to contain and rein them in. But also, as you know, there are very important segments of the policy establishment who do not believe in compromise and believe that negotiation and compromise spell weakness and surrender. That, of course, is not true. In order to negotiate, everybody has to give and take. And so that's going to be very, very tough. If Mike Pompeo believes, or Donald Trump believes, or whoever else is involved in this believes that in order for the United States to get a good deal out of North Korea, that they have to totally surrender, it's not going to work. And she told me, she said, look, every negotiation, when you're the strong one, which the United States is the strong one, right, whether it's vis-a-vis Iran, vis-a-vis North Korea, you have to give your opponent somewhere to hide, somewhere to save a certain amount of face and dignity while doing what you want them to do. So the ultimate aim is for them not to use their weaponry. So you have to create this paradigm without saying, if you don't give it up, that's the end of it. And then what happens? Then what happens? Then you're on a path to war. What would have happened if they hadn't sought and got this deal with Iran? You know, Israel was convinced that there was going to be a nuclear weapon or something like that. And who knows what military alternative might have been taken if this deal hadn't been worked out and this negotiation hadn't been worked out. So if people can try to not make perfect the enemy of the good, then there may be some hope.
Well, I guess that brings us to when they have this meeting, Kim versus Trump, who wins?
Well, okay, here's the thing. First, we don't know whether there's going to be a meeting because the North Koreans have not publicly confirmed what the South Koreans told President Trump, which is that Kim Jong-un wanted to have a meeting. So we haven't actually heard from the North Koreans. And then even American analysts and officials believe that Kim Jong-un has so far been in the driver's seat at every turn, not least perfecting or getting towards a much more capable nuclear capacity and missile capacity. And, you know, he's the one who came to the Pyeongchang Olympics. I mean, he didn't come, but he sent his, you know, the number 2 in the hierarchy. He sent his sister. You know, there was all these smiles and this and that. And, I mean, the world was thrilled because he had set up this paradigm that he was the crazy guy who could, you know, incinerate the world. And all of a sudden, everybody's just delighted that instead the smiling face of North Korea appears at the South Korea Games. And then he says he's going to have a summit with the South Koreans. And then he says he wants to talk to President Trump. Wow. Is he the good guy now? I mean, that's what's going on in the visuals. But the truth is, and the fact is, that never has an American president met with a North Korean leader. So if Trump does meet with him, it's a big feather in his cap. So President Trump has to be super prepared. Super prepared. I mean this seriously.
Yeah.
He has to be super prepared so that North Korea doesn't score a propaganda victory and give nothing back, and that he recognizes the areas where there is, you know, room for negotiation and agreement, and doesn't say, well, if I don't get all of this, I'm going home. Make America great again.
Okay, this is a true fact. They actually have to keep finding ways to put his name in paragraphs of briefings to lure him from one paragraph to the next.
Well, here's a fact as well. I didn't know that one. But he himself has said, and others have said, and this is why he probably has a very good relationship with Mike Pompeo, because Mike Pompeo has been the person every day who goes and gives him the presidential daily briefing, the intelligence and all that, and explains it to him in a way that they like, that's convivial.
Exactly.
Yeah. So he's apparently developed a trusting relationship with Pompeo.
Have you heard of this new CIA woman, Miss Torture? 2018.
Gina Hapsell, I believe her name is. So Gina, well, you've probably all read it, so this is nothing new, but she was, I mean, it's public record. She did lead one of the first, or the first US black site, which was established in Thailand after 9/11, and was there when the torturing of Abu Zubaydah and other 9/11 suspects was going on. And then her name is on the memo that, because a lot of this was filmed by the CIA, and several, I don't know how long ago it was, a year or so ago, they ordered it destroyed, right? Or maybe it was contemporaneous. In other words, her name apparently is on the memo ordering these tapes, films, whatever they are, to be destroyed. Having said that, there are many upstanding members of the CIA community, people who we all, you know, interview and enjoy their analysis, who say that she's very good. And this is the best that we can have at the CIA right now, that she's very respected. And so we'll see how it goes. Yes. I mean, does she have to get confirmed? Well,
we're going to continue our wild ride with President Trump. And in the meantime...
Because torture is illegal now in this country,
Christiane's new series, Sex and Love Around the World, premieres March 17th on CNN at 10 p.m. And I highly recommend it because you can see her playing ping pong naked. And also, you can see her tied up in bondage gear, which everyone will want to see. And I would just like to say she's the coolest.
Maureen, thank you so much.